pretty frequently. And some of the talks that I still do now at Stand to Reason were talks that I developed, when I was there at Hope Chapel in Hermosa Beach. My daughter's homecoming is today. She's 14 and a sophomore. Here I am. Well, this was scheduled long before I knew about the homecoming, and then I found out I'm on the plane, and then I get a text from my daughter. She's a sophomore. And she said, "Oh, Dad, did you hear? I got elected homecoming princess for sophomore class, right?" What did I hear? Where am I going to hear that? I'm on the plane flying out here, and I'm thinking, oh, goodness. So I asked her, because she's, well, I don't want to sound like a dad. I don't talk about my kids too often, and I don't like it when other people talk about their kids, because who the heck cares? But I'm just going to say, she got, I don't know if elected is the right word, as class president, but the teachers made that decision. So the teachers decided about this, a person they thought would be a good representative for ASB, and so she got elected. Then, but when she got this thing, I texted, I said, "Did the teachers vote on that, or did the students?" She said, "The students." So I thought, well, that's cool, that's good. And she's on a good trajectory. I don't know how deep her roots go with the Lord. You never know. My 17-year-old is not with the Lord, but so we'll see what happens. But at least this one's still on a good trajectory. This is the time when they get tested. Now, my 14-year-old Eva, she's in a Christian school, and she had classical Christian education coming up through 8th grade, then now in a Christian high school, and really good school. I really like it a lot. But still, you don't know until their convictions are tested. And to find out whether or not this is theirs or was mom and dad's and my community's. Now I'm out of that and ain't no so convincing anymore. And that's always a hard time for parents. And now I know from experience. I used to talk about it theoretically, but no longer theory. We got about 5 more minutes before we start. Oh, 3 minutes. I think it's great they gave you notebooks to take notes in. It's fabulous.
It's great if you're left-handed.
Wait. Oh, there you go. Well, you got to be used to the standard way. You like the Hebrew stuff, you want to go the other direction, right? Wait, say that again?
You had violated the ethics of a speaker. By questioning the other speaker.
Yeah. Well, I was just interested in when I came up the first time and I had a false start, the other guy was in line before me. He ended up asking my question, but I wanted more detail about it. So, but that's fine. I mean, if the speaker wanted to ask me a question, it's fine.
He's probably going to come running into here now and come after you.
Yeah, whatever, but I wasn't taking exception with him. He's in position to know a lot more than I do about this situation, so I was curious about his view. I was a little surprised by it too, but I liked his answers. Like, we could do some things, but those things aren't going to be done. The only things that are going to be done are the stupid, destructive things. This is just that's right. This is my suspicion, and it's just going to make things worse. Just going to make matters worse. So, unfortunately. "47 seconds to go. Can't wait. You can cut the tension with a knife. Maybe I should have one of these. Ah. I don't usually drink these, but here we go. Well, do we have a quorum here? Are you ready to go up there, boss? Okay. Oh, we got some more people. You're late. Oh, no, you're not. 3, 2, 1. You made it. Oh, you're late. 11 seconds late. What's up with that? Okay. Actually, your clock is different than my clock. We got 2 seconds. No, now we're time. 1 o'clock. Hey, you made it according to that clock. But Apple says that you're late. Oh, you're still, we ought to wait a couple more minutes for all of the slackers. There you go. Who said that? There you go. Okay, we'll get rolling. So a number of years ago, I was on a short flight from Los Angeles to San Francisco. And I was sitting next to a gentleman named Stuart. Now, Stuart was a world traveler, a kind of an older gentleman, and been around a lot, and had had a little too much to drink. So he is very talkative, right? And he is very free with his opinion. And so I don't know how we got going on spiritual matters, but we got to that fairly quickly, and I don't know that I really introduced it, unless he might have asked me where I was going, and I told him what I was going to be doing. He said, one of those kind of thing. And he was explaining how he traveled all over the world, and he'd surveyed all religions, and he realized that the basic truth of all religions was love and getting along with other people. Okay, and so I'm just patiently listening, and if you know my general approach to these things, I try to listen a lot, ask a lot of questions, and draw people out. Don't kind of go for the gold right out of the gate. I want to gather information, get the lay of the land, and let people talk, and have a friendly conversation. So there's Stuart. He's carrying on and carrying on. This is like a 25 or 30-minute flight. That's all it is. And then he made reference to those people who think their view is the right view, as being, I think the word hate kind of crept into the conversation. Like those folks are they're weird and they're hateful because they think they're right. And it turns out that Stuart was what you would call a pluralist. Now, a pluralist is a person who believes that all religions, at least in the sense that I'm using the word here, that all religions are equally true and equally valid. So it's kind of relativism applied to religion. And it didn't matter what you believed, each was just as good. And in his view, they're all basically the same because they all focus in on love. And can't we all just get along? Well, as a matter of fact, that isn't true about religions. Religions are all over the place. That's why they're different. And it isn't as if, God isn't even a central feature of religions. Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. God does not enter into it. Animism is not a God-centered religion. And it's not even about morality. Animism is about manipulating the spirits, doing the things that the spirits want you to do so they won't bug you, and maybe they'll help you out. So he was completely mistaken on this broad assessment, but it's a mistake a lot of people make. But he was obviously an intelligent man, yet he was still making this particular mistake. And so towards the end of the flight, after he had talked quite a bit about his own view, and I'm just listening politely, he says kind of confidently, "So, do you think I've done a good job thinking through this issue?" Like that. And I said, well, since you asked, no, I don't think so. And the reasons that I didn't think he'd done a good job are really the topic of this particular talk. And because this talk is dealing with that basic idea. Are all religions equally legitimate paths to God or not? Or is it reasonable to think that some might be true, or even one might be true, and if one is true in the sense that I mean it, true to reality, that means the others are going to be false in the points they differ that are relevant, okay? There may be some overlap where they're true, but taken as a whole, they can't all be true. And before I get started on this, since this is the issue I want to talk about, and I know this is controversial. I know this is a controversial issue, and it's one of the things that not only non-Christians don't like, which is Jesus' claim that he's the only way. This is really politically incorrect nowadays, and incidentally, lots of times it's a good idea tactically to put it on Jesus instead of on yourself. When I did a debate with Deepak Chopra, a national TV debate, 15 years ago now, I guess it was, I was nobody. Deepak Chopra was one of the few people in the world that you know by his first name. You say Deepak, everyone knows who you're talking about. And so I did not want to pit myself against Dr. Chopra. I wanted to pit Jesus of Nazareth against Dr. Chopra. And that was a strategy that I adopted. I call this tactic, by the way, what a friend we have in Jesus. Okay, it's just, in other words, you use him and his statements. So people are like, Jesus is the only way. Well, I say, it's not my idea. It's Jesus' idea. Do you think he was mistaken? And so I kind of shift the burden there. But the key is, as a follower of Christ, I'm following what he says, and this creates disturbance with other people. I understand that. So I want to kind of help cash this issue out for you, because for many Christians, this is also a difficult thing. And it's difficult not just because of the pushback they get, it's difficult because they don't understand why. They don't understand why it is that Jesus is the only way. Okay? And this shows that they don't understand the foundational Christian worldview, all right? I wrote a book called The Story of Reality. I think it's in the bookstore. There's a few left. But the whole reason I wrote that was so that there was a straightforward characterization of Christianity that anybody could understand, Christian or the non-Christian. But I wrote it a lot so that people can give it away to non-Christians, but I wanted Christians to understand their own view as well. That there's a reason why Jesus is the only way. I mentioned it yesterday, simply put, because he's the only one who solved the problem. But if you don't have a clear picture of the problem, then it's going to be hard for you to fix in onto the solution. What I'm going to do with today, though, is I want to deal specifically with the idea of different religions and how it is somebody might go through a process of trying to figure out which religion is the right one, if any are the correct one. And as I mentioned yesterday in the illustration that I gave, or the anecdote of my experience on this program, Religion on the Line, I'm not going to encourage you to think about finding something you like or something that resonates with you in a subjective way. The goal for us is to try to figure out what is true, which religious view is actually true. So what I want to do first in my talk, in terms of the structure here, is I'm going to demonstrate why religious pluralism is just plain old false. Okay? It's that it can't be the case that all religions are equally valid routes to God. All roads don't lead to Rome, as it turns out, spiritually speaking. Second, I want to give you 3 different principles that we actually use all the time that help us figure out what is true. And then I want to show you how those 3 tools give us confidence that Christian theism is the best answer to the question about what is true when it comes to God and religion. Before I get into that structure, though, just a preliminary matter. And this is a point that I make especially when I'm talking with non-Christian groups. I've spoken on more than 80 college and university campuses. And then sometimes they're Christian, but a lot of times nowadays the Christians need this message just as much as anybody else, okay? And I offer an illustration here because I'm trying to remove a barrier that a lot of non-Christians have regarding the Christian claim that Jesus is the only way of salvation. So I invite them to consider if their friend who's not feeling well, who thinks maybe he needs to go to the doctor and check out what's wrong, and he wants some comfort and some support, he takes you along. And then your friend goes to the doctor examines him, and the doctor says, you know, you're really sick, and if you don't get care immediately, you're going to die. This is not good news. And your friend looks at the doctor, and your friend says, you're mean. I'm going to go find some other doctor who's not so mean as you. Now, I asked the audience, what would you think of your friend if he did that? Well, first of all, you might think, well, that's an odd thing to say to the doctor, because how is it that his character is in question because he gives you news you don't like? All right? There's no connection there. It's not just odd, though, but it's also foolish, because it might be, even if your doctor was mean, he could be right on his diagnosis. And therefore, you're ignoring him for the wrong reasons, and you might die as a result, okay? Okay, now I want to change my illustration a little bit. I tell the audience, I said, you're talking to a friend of yours who's a Christian, and the Christian says, Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, is the only way you're ever going to be forgiven of your crimes against God and be reconciled to the Father. And you say, you're mean. Now, of course, that's not the word you use. You say, you're intolerant, you're bigoted, you're judgmental, you're narrow-minded, all of these other things. Now, I want you to notice that in this case, and I mentioned this earlier today, that the person has changed the subject. You were talking about an issue, now you're focusing in on the Christian's character, okay, which is a different issue, and it's unrelated to whether his view is correct or not. And so the parallel with the doctor's circumstance is actually a good one, because Christians actually do think that people are dying of a deadly disease called sin, and that there is an antidote, and if you don't get that antidote, then you're not going to be rescued from that. Okay? So there's a parallel here. And I'm just warning the audience, and you can use this illustration yourself when you're talking to people about this who are inclined to get upset at you for the claim. Because my goal here is to disabuse them of this foolishness and help them to think about the thing that needs to be thought about, okay? And not allow them to be distracted by nonsense. All right? And that's what I tell them. I said, if this is your complaint, okay, look, Christians may be narrow-minded, arrogant, bigoted, whatever. That has no relevance to whether the claims they are making about Jesus are accurate or not. That's what matters. And incidentally, I don't think it's any of those things to say that you're correct. You think you're correct about something. As we mentioned earlier, everybody thinks they're correct about what they believe, and they're making assertions about all these controversial issues, and no one takes exception with that, like, you're arrogant because you think your pro-choice view is correct. It's only pretty much one side of the conversation that is given to name-calling, okay? I'm just making an observation there. You want to try to sidestep that and help them to sidestep it so you can get down to the real issue, okay? Now, with that in mind, I want to offer you the reasons why I am convinced that religious pluralism is false. Now, I'm not making the case for Christianity at this point. I'm making a case against all religions are equally valid routes to God, all right? And I actually was invited to be on a TV show on this topic. And it was filmed in Canada, in Toronto. And I don't know how they got my name, but they called me at the office. And whenever you're invited to do these kind of shows, especially television, there always has to be a pre-interview. So there was a guy named Pierre that called me to pre-interview me to make sure I was weird enough to be on his program. Incidentally, this program was, it's called A Test of Faith, and it was a religious program, but it was a secular show, and what they did is they called in some religious weirdo, they put him in the hot seat, then they had a semicircular table, they had two or three other people who opposed them, and they'd beat up on the weirdo, for an hour on national TV. Now, where do you think Mr. Koukl was sitting? Okay, I was in the hot seat. Now, what was my weird religious view? I rejected religious pluralism. All the rest of the people on the panel were in different faith traditions, but they all accepted religious pluralism, okay? I was the bad guy, basically. All right, no, they made the phone call. So I talked with Pierre for probably 40 minutes. It was great. Had a great time. He figured, you're weird enough, we're going to fly you out to Toronto, and out I went. Now, before the show started, though, I got a chance to meet Pierre. So we're on a sound stage, it's all set up, and we're talking out here while they're getting everything squared away. And I said to Pierre, I want to make a gentleman's wager with you here. I said, I'm thinking how this show is going to go. They're going to ask me questions, and I'm going to make my case, and I'm actually going to give an argument from my point of view. But they're going to ignore the argument, and they're going to start attacking me personally. And they're going to call me narrow-minded, arrogant, and et cetera, the whole rundown. I said, I could be wrong. I don't know, but we'll just see. So that's our gentleman's wager, right? And when the show started, it was just me and Valerie Pringle, who was the host. And she asked me, why are you against religious pluralism, or why do you think it's false? And so in sum, I'll give you what my argument was, all right? And by the way, I made a strategic decision that in this discussion, I was not going to advance Christianity. Now, I could have said, well, because Christianity is true for these reasons, and if Christianity is true, then any religion that contradicts it at a central point is going to be false at that point. It's a noble way of arguing. But I chose not to do that because I did not want Christianity to be the object of discussion. All I wanted to do was a simple thing to show them anybody taking refuge in religious pluralism, this isn't going to work. That's all I wanted to do. So I'm just biting off a small piece, right? And so she asked me, why do you think religious pluralism is false? And I said, well, think of it this way. Christianity teaches that Jesus is the Messiah. Judaism says that he's not. Now, either Jesus is the Messiah or he's not the Messiah, but he can't be both. If he's the Messiah, the Christians are right and the Jews are wrong. If he's not the Messiah, the Jews are right and the Christians are wrong, but under no circumstance can they both be right. I said, if God exists, and that might be an open question, but if he does, he's either personal or he's not personal. If he's personal, well, then the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians are right on that point about God, and the Hindus are wrong. If it turns out that he's impersonal, then the Hindus are right, and the Muslims and Christians and Jews are wrong, but under no circumstances can they both be right. When you die, I don't know, maybe you get reincarnated, maybe you go to heaven or hell, maybe you just lie in the grave, but you can't do them all at the same time. Somebody's mistaken. And notice we're not talking about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. We are talking about really substantive issues here, defining things. Religions look at reality in a different way, and they make claims about reality that conflict with each other. They can't be all made to mean basically the same thing. They don't. That's why there are different religions, because they're so different. Okay? So there's my argument. Now, that's a pretty good argument. Now, I said there's a couple ways someone might try to get around it, but I don't think anybody in the panel is going to try. And one of them is to say that all religions are phony anyway and just choose the placebo you like. It's just religious wishful thinking. I talked about that a little bit yesterday. That's one way to get around it. But now you're making a very strong claim. You're not saying that all religions are really true. You're saying that all religions are really false. Okay, and this is the tolerant view, right? But that's really what it amounts to. So there's another problem there. In any event, I didn't think anybody was going to go in that direction, okay? And indeed, the first person came up, we had a commercial break, the first person that came up was a Sikh. A Sikh is the religious order from India. The gentlemen wear the turbans, and he was a barrister there in Toronto. I met him in the green room. He was really nice to me in the green room. Now when we come out, it's a different story, but he come out a little passive-aggressive, Because Valerie Pringle asked the Sikh, he said, well, what do you think about Mr. Koukl's view? And what he said, and he said, well, if Mr. Koukl thinks he won the lottery, well, good for him. Huh? Exactly. What is he talking about? That's the way he started. Now, what he had done is he'd gone to our website, str.org, and downloaded some material, realizes that we were Christians in the conservative Protestant tradition. In other words, we thought we were right and everybody else is wrong. That was the issue I didn't want to discuss there, but that was the issue he started with. We won the lottery. Lucky us. So it starts out passive-aggressive, but he didn't stay passive for long, because pretty soon he's starting to get bugged at me, and he's got paper that he printed out from our website, and he's shaking it across the table, and he's saying, you're the kind of people who cause wars, you intolerant, narrow-minded, all this other stuff. And actually, Valerie Pringle, this guy was getting so upset. Now remember, this is the tolerant, pluralistic religion, everybody's right guy. He's getting so upset at me, and I'm pretty much cool, calm, and collected. I'm sitting there, I'm not all animated and bugged. He's there coming out of she had to push him down in his chair twice. He was so excited, settle down, sonny boy kind of thing. But he was bugged at me, okay? Then they brought out a Hindu pastor, and he was nicer, but he still had the same view. That all religions, all right, he's got his, they got theirs, and then you had a female pastor from the United Church of Canada, okay, in the Christian tradition. Pluralists all, okay, and very aggressive, actually. And it was kind of interesting where the conversation started going, because before long you start hearing these kinds of words like narrow-minded, intolerant, arrogant, etc., etc. Are they responding to my argument? No, they're fulfilling my prophecy. And in fact, at one point I actually said that. I said, it's interesting where our conversation has gone. We started out talking about religious pluralism, but now we've gotten shifted over onto a question of Mr. Koukl's character. Mr. Koukl is this, that, and the other thing. I said, how about if we do this? Why don't we I'm willing to just agree with you. I'm intolerant, I'm narrow-minded, I'm arrogant, I'll own all of that stuff. My daughters would probably say yes to that as well. So I agree with you now. If I just agree with you that I'm the bad guy, can we now get back onto the discussion, right? And then I said, it's interesting too, because it's obvious from your responses that you think that I'm mistaken in my point of view, okay? You think that my point of view that I've offered or that you're presuming of me as a follower of Jesus, that this is a mistaken view. Well, it might be mistaken. But if my view is mistaken, that means this understanding of Christianity, my religion, as it were, is not true. That means there's at least one religious view, according to you, that is not true. Therefore, not all religions are true. Therefore, if you're right in your attack on me, you are wrong about what we're supposed to be talking about here today. They didn't get it. One whole hour, they didn't get it. One person got it. Who got it? Pierre. Pierre was an atheist, and Pierre got it. He understood. In fact, after we were done with the whole show, he jumps up on the stage and he's hopping mad, and he's mad at the Sikh, and he's using language appropriate for an atheist to express his emotions. I mean, he's just let him have it. What was going on here? I had made an argument. Instead of addressing the argument, I was being attacked. Okay? Common fare. The key here is the argument. Religious pluralism is false. All religions can't be true because they represent competing understandings of the nature of reality. Look, they could all be false. It might be that none of us get it right substantially, but they can't all be true. So I reject religious pluralism out of hand for those reasons. Now, what I'd like to talk about is testing truth claims. So they can't all be true. How do we go about figuring out which one might be true? Okay? And there are actually three different means that we use to accomplish that task, and we use it all the time, okay? One way that we know whether a thing is true, I'll give you a summary up front and then I'll go into more detail. One way that we know things are true is because we know them by reflection, okay, by reflection. In other words, we just think about the claims and we reflect on it to see if it, I guess the simplest way to put it is makes sense. So the atheist says, I don't believe in God. You ask him, why not? Because God told me he doesn't exist. Now, there's a very straightforward and obvious example of a claim that does not comport with reason. It's a violation of reason. That one is self-contradictory. And so we can totally dismiss, maybe not atheism, but at least that reason that he gives for being an atheist, okay? The next way that we discover the truth is that we discover it by observation. Now, we've had a lot of talks at this seminar on that. Hugh Ross is fabulous there because in one area of observation, the nature of the cosmos, we can see things that seem to be true about the cosmos that fit with our worldview. Okay, now this is the classical definition of truth, that when your view fits the way the world actually is, then you have truth in that circumstance. You know, sometimes people say things like, well, God created all truth. I don't really like that way of putting it. God created everything. But truth is a relationship between a belief or a claim and the way the world actually is, the world that God created. So if we have beliefs that fit the world, then we can have confidence that our belief is true. That's what the word true actually means, truth as correspondence. But there's a third way that we learn truth, and it turns out probably the majority of things that you think you know, and probably do, you don't know simply by reflection. You don't know simply by observing the world and having it correspond. You know by authority. You know because someone else who you trust has told you so. I know my flight is leaving at 6:30 in the morning. How do I know that? Because I got a schedule. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to be that way, but generally, I am trusting in authority for that kind of thing. All right? So let's look a little bit more closely at how each one of those things work. Knowledge according to reflection, knowledge according to observation, and knowledge according to authority. Okay? When it comes to truth as reflection, there just are some things we consider, we think about, that just doesn't, these things don't add up. By the way, there's a lot of things that don't add up that are not obvious from the get-go, and we have to reflect on it a little bit to see the contradiction. I'll give you an example in just a moment. But here's a simple one. The headline on a newspaper in the rack in the grocery store. You're checking out, there it is. And the headline says, "Woman discovered who is 10 years younger than her son." Okay, you know, this is like nonsense. But, you know, there's only one left because people already bought about 15 copies. They go, really? Oh, God, I got to see. Show me the pictures. Okay. No empirical search is necessary to reject this claim. You reflect on it, realize it is by nature contradictory and can be just simply dismissed. Now, explicit contradictions are often obvious like that one, like my friend Frank Beckwith, who I co-authored the book Relativism with. By the way, they actually have relativism books in the bookstore. I just noticed that. I didn't mention that in the bigger sessions. I probably could have sold more, but it's available. Frank he's a philosopher over at Baylor. He's good at turning a phrase. And he said, I used to believe in reincarnation, but that was in a prior life. Okay. I've had amnesia for as long as I can remember. I guess another thing he said. I've had amnesia. I messed that one up. Let's try another one. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. Who said that? Yogi Berra. He's the master of malaprops. Always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't go to yours. Yogi Berra. This page intentionally left blank. Not anymore, right? Okay, so these are really obvious contradictions. But how about this? Science is the only thing that gives us truth about the world.
Science is the only way we can know truth about the world, okay? Now, this is actually self-contradictory. This cannot be true. Because the statement, science is the only thing that gives us accurate truth about the world, is a statement that the people saying it presume is true. So then the question is, if that statement is true, what is the scientific evidence that has substantiated the statement? In other words, we're going to hold that statement to its own criteria. Well, the fact is, there is no evidence scientifically that demonstrate that science is the only means of giving us information that we can count on. In fact, there's a whole bunch of other things that have to be in place. I mentioned some of those, I don't remember if it was this morning or last evening or whatever it was, but those things have to be in place for science to work to begin with. So I can reject that statement out of hand. I remember J.P. Moreland once, talking about this, and he's listening at some kind of gathering to a person who's involved in the scientific enterprise or whatever, and just, spouting off about this and being dismissive of J.P. because J.P.'s a philosopher and he's religion, and that doesn't tell you truth. Instead, it's just science that tells you truth. And J.P. says, I'm kind of confused. And he says, why? Because you've been talking all this time about science being the only thing that gives truth about the world, but you never gave me any scientific evidence for the truth of that statement. See, he saw the contradiction right away. So there's an example of people, of points of view, or the suicidal kind of principle in operation, okay? The point of view doesn't comport with the kind of sensibility I'm talking about, okay? How about this sign on the campus? This was a sign on the campus lawn. It is not wrong to think you're right, but it's not right to think others are wrong. I know some of you are going, huh? Yeah, this is in kindergarten. This is a college campus. It's not wrong to think you're right, but it's not right to think others are wrong. Well, to think that you're right is just to think that others are wrong who contradict your right view. It's entailed in the first notion. This is nonsense. But the students are going, write that. Can I put that down? I'm going to put it on a bumper sticker. Really? Okay. There's a whole lot of issues that we deal with as followers of Christ. The pushback is guilty of this error, okay? In the tactics book, I call this tactic that we use to demonstrate the problem as suicide, okay? These ideas commit hara-kiri. They have within them the seeds of their own destruction. All you have to do is recognize them and point it out. You don't have to be clever. Recognize them is the tricky thing, recognizing them. And once you get into this a little bit, like the judgmental anecdote, the issue of the guy who said that's judgmental and being judgmental is wrong, that I gave in an earlier talk, for some of the audience, that was like they'd never heard that before. And I remember where I was sitting in a classroom and J.P. Moreland was teaching it when this first dawned on me. He was saying, I was talking to a college student, and the college student said, you shouldn't be pushing your views on me. The student said that. And JP said, well, it looks to me like you're pushing your view on me right now. Now, he violated a tactical rule that he didn't use a question, but his point was really good. This is suicidal. This is what I call practical suicide. You're doing the thing that you're telling me not to do, okay? So I had never heard that before. I'm getting a master's degree at that time in apologetics, and it never had occurred to me. And I'm writing like crazy. I'm thinking, oh, man, this is great. I can take this to town. And in fact, ever since then, I can see these circumstances just like that. Once your eyes are open to it, you're going to see these suicidal statements that people are making all the time. And it's not just that they're mistaken. It's that they're mistaken because their statements are internally contradictory. Okay, so when it comes to this issue of contradiction, making sense, as it were, this is a tool you can use to be dismissive of certain claims, religious claims, that don't satisfy this condition. So this is why I never really have been attracted to Hinduism, okay? Because in Hinduism, there is only one reality, and that is Vedantic Hinduism, and that one reality is a unity, all right? So the one God, if you will, impersonal, unified force. That's why they call it monism, one-ism. Only one thing exists, that's God, and he's in a unity. What is everything else? Well, everything else, all these particulars, these are all illusions. It's called Maya. And part of our problem is we believe we're individual and separated from God when really we are part of God. And when we escape the cycle of reincarnation, we are restored and we are lost back into the Godhead, okay? Brahman is Atman and Atman is Brahman, all right? Now, the problem I've had with that is, here's what I'm being asked to believe. I am being asked to believe that I can know that I am an illusion. How's that sit with you guys? Does Charlie Brown know he's a cartoon character? You had a dream last night, maybe? Your characters in your dream, do those characters know they were in your dream? No, illusions don't know anything. So how is it that I, as a part of Maya, the illusion, can know that I'm part of an illusion? To me, that's a big problem. So Hinduism, it doesn't satisfy that first requirement for me. Okay, so that's the first. I could give you more examples of that. But let me just say, by comparison to Christianity, so what are the kinds of things that I believe that are kind of foundational to Christianity? I believe that there is a God who created everything else. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, you talk to Hugh, this is really consistent with Big Bang cosmology, because all the cosmologists agree, at least to this notion, that the universe is not eternally old, but had a finite beginning. So the question we can ask is, who banged or what banged the Big Bang? Now, I know some Christians are not comfortable with the Big Bang because of other theological implications, but even if you don't hold to a Big Bang, the people you talk to do. And so why can't we just simply trade on that? It seems to me a Big Bang needs a Big Banger, right? Okay, this is common sense, cause and effect. If you want the real sophisticated name for that, it's a cosmological argument called the Kalam cosmological argument. Christian philosopher William Lane Craig has done a lot of good work in making that more popular, but it's a simple notion. Effects need causes that are adequate to them. And in fact, the whole scientific enterprise is tied to that, cause and effect. So we're just asking, the universe comes into being, what caused that? It's going to have to be something outside of the universe, right, first off. It's going to have to be something that is not physical. It's going to have to be something that's smart. It's going to have to be personal, because persons start causal chains. It's not just dominoes falling forever. It's someone initiating something, okay? And before long, when you think about it, it's going to require someone like the God of the Bible to make sense of the beginning of the universe, okay? So here we have one point of contact, okay? Actually, I realize I'm kind of confusing, in a sense, two different things here. So the two different criteria. But the idea, let me just leave it this way. The idea that God is a cause to the universe makes perfect sense. The idea that the universe caused itself or has no cause, that makes no sense at all. Now, somebody might say, well, it's possible that the universe caused itself. And I say, all right, maybe it's possible. I don't think so. But even if it is it the odds-on favorite? So ladies, you get home from work, and you look in the garage, you see a brand new Mercedes XL. You say, honey, where'd this brand new Mercedes XL come from? You say, well, darling, just popped into existence out of nothing, no cause. You're going to buy, that's the way the universe started. A lot of people think, so what do you think? You're not going to buy that. It's not the odds-on favorite, okay? So what I'm saying here is our understanding of the beginning of the universe comports with reason It's not against reason. That's the first criteria. I could go in a lot more detail, but I don't have time to. So let's jump to the second. Knowing what's true, observation and discovery. Does the world fit the way we discover it to be? Now, this is a lot what Hugh's been talking about, and I actually was just making reference to it. When we examine the details of the world, we find particular things that are true of the world that fit the Christian story. The origin of the universe is one of them. The material world exists. That's our view. It's contrary to Hinduism. Also, the universe is designed. It's orderly, can be experienced and measured with reasonable accuracy. This are the kinds of things that Hugh has been talking about in his sessions. But this comport perfectly with the Christian worldview. This is why there's such powerful evidences for our view, okay? Because the details we discover about the world fit the way the world really is. Another thing that we know, and this is one of those immaterial, non-empirical things, but all of us know that human beings are qualitatively different than animals. There's a few people a little confused on that, but most of us know, kids don't treat each other like animals, or human beings shouldn't be treated that way. Why not? Because we're not animals. We're not mere animals. We are creaturely, but there's something that sets us above it. We all know this. This is why we have human rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that each is endowed by his Creator with certain inalienable rights. Well, rights aren't anything you could find in a test tube. These are things that we're aware of that are moral things, that are obligations that we have towards others, in virtue of being human. That's why they're inalienable. They're tied to our humanity in a way that they can't, inseparable way, and they are given to us by God. And they aren't just, in a sense, just dropped on us. They are ours in virtue of the kind of creatures that we are. Now, this is something that we are all completely aware of. It's why we can guess termites and not Jews. Because human beings are not mere creatures. There is something transcendent about us that gives us value. Now, naturalism, materialism, this is not able to explain that. If we're just meat all the way down, there is nothing that can ground transcendent value, okay? But we know we have transcendent value. That's a truth of the universe, of humanity, if you will, and that Christianity can explain. Why are we like this? Because God made us like Him in a way that makes us valuable. And it makes us possible to have a friendship with Him because we are like Him in that way. We are made in the image of God. I've just given a couple of examples here, but I actually used to give this talk at colleges. I'd go into philosophy classes at colleges where I was invited to come in, and I would basically make the case for the Christian worldview by looking at all of these things that were consistent with the Christian worldview that all of the non-Christian students actually believed. And I remember when I was done, and to make the case, all the way up until Jesus is the Savior part, but I could get all the way up to that. And these are all things they couldn't take exception with because they held them to be so. And afterwards, when I had Q&A, one guy said, we had a Baptist preacher in here a couple of weeks. Everybody's mad at him. But we can't take exception with what you said because everything you told us is true. We can't figure out, what are we going to complain about? And this is my point. Christianity comports with the world and reality in those ways, in vital ways that we can measure it. Our ideas fit the world as it really is. And by the way, this is why I'm never tempted by atheism. Because if I was an atheist, I'd have to commit myself to all kinds of things that are totally counterintuitive. Everything comes from nothing. Immutable natural law comes from chance. Order comes from chaos. Life comes from non-life. Consciousness comes from matter. And I don't even know what consciousness is. By the way, no, neither do they. Okay, one of the so-called new atheists, Daniel Dennett, okay, is double N, double T, okay? So you write that down, and when you're in somebody else's breakout, go to your phone to YouTube, type in Daniel Dennett, consciousness is an illusion. And you'll see Daniel Dennett there sitting in a lawn chair talking about consciousness. Now, what is consciousness? Conscious is our sentience. It's our awareness of the world around us and our awareness of ourselves. Okay? Consciousness is a real problem for materialists because it cannot be reduced to something material. And lots of people have tried. And this is one reason why a very well-known philosopher who's an atheist, his name is Thomas Nagel, from New York University, wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos. I never get the subtitle exactly right, but it's something like why the neo-Darwinian materialist view of the universe is almost certainly false. Now, he's an atheist, but he realizes that Darwinism has a huge problem with consciousness. They can't reduce it to something material, which it must be, because Darwinism is a materialistic process, okay? So now what? Daniel Dennett, sitting in a lawn chair. Consciousness is an illusion. I'm not making this up. Consciousness is an illusion. Why does Professor of Philosophy, Dr. Daniel Dennett, say that consciousness, probably the most obvious feature of reality to all of us? I mean, I can't imagine what would be more obvious to each of us than our awareness of ourselves and our world. That's just an illusion. Why does he say that? Because there's no place in his materialistic worldview for it to fit. So he must deny its reality. Now, I want you to think for a moment about the statement. And I'm going to ask a question. This is the question I would ask Professor Dennett. What is an illusion? An illusion is when your consciousness is being appeared to in a false way. Okay, I know that sounds like a philosopher's way of putting it, but I paid a lot of money to be able to talk like that. All right, so there you go. Illusion is when your consciousness is being appeared to in a false way. In other words, you have to have a consciousness before there can be an illusion. So if consciousness is an illusion, then what's having the illusion? Is an illusion having the illusion? Okay, this makes no sense whatsoever. It's deep six immediately when you think about it, but a very bright man has made a very simple mistake in thinking he ought to know better. He probably does, but you know why he's got to say this? Because his philosophy of naturalism that he's deeply and profoundly committed to must be true, and therefore consciousness must be an illusion. So his view there not only contradicts the first one. On reflection, we know that there's a contradiction built into that statement, but also we know that consciousness isn't an illusion. It's a feature of the world that we all can behold without any help from anyone else. Christianity fits the real world. Okay, now I want to go to the last one here. And again, there's a lot of other illustrations that I can give. The third way we know what's true, first one is by reflection. The second one is based on observation of the way the world is. And I don't mean just empirical observation, but just all of our faculties. We observe true things about the world, like the value of humans. That's not empirical, but by observation of the world. And we want our religious view to fit those things. We want it to comport with our rational sensibilities, and we want our religious view to fit the way the world actually is as we discover it, okay? Knowing what's true, authority, okay. Now, how many people here believe that the sun is the center of our solar system? So it's a heliocentric solar system. Sun in the middle and the moon. I got to give a picture. Hugh could put the picture up and you go, oh yeah, everybody raise your hand. Okay, I agree. Okay. How many believe that water boils at 212 Fahrenheit at sea level? He would have to say 100 degrees, okay, because he's one of those screwy Canadians. Like, there are two groups of people, countries in the world. There are all the countries that are on the metric system, and then there's a country who put a man on the moon. Just saying. So, how do you know those things that I just talked about? Any astronauts here? Anybody that went kind of out into space and could kind of sit back and, oh, I could see, yeah, they're all moving around the sun? No. How many people have taken water down to sea level and put a thermometer in a beaker and you boil it up and check the temperature? Nah. How do you know those things? You know those things because someone told you they were so. In fact, everything you know about the past, everything you think you know, you weren't there. You know based on someone's testimony. Everything you know about the future, I mentioned about flying off tomorrow, 6:30, Delta Airlines, out to MSP, and then back to LA. I know that by authority, okay? Everything you know about places you've never been, or things that are too small for you to see with the naked eye, all of these things you know by an authority. Almost everything you know by authority. It's odd then to me when one appeals to the Bible, for example, as an authority, that people take exception like that. Oh, you're just believing in a book. You got any books in your library? Of course you do. You know, this is the way we know things. We share what we've learned. Okay, the key about authority is whether your authority can be trusted. That's the key. Can the authority be trusted? Now, this is why when you have a criminal trial and they bring in an authority to speak to an issue to help everybody know on behalf of a defendant, what happens next? The authority gets cross-examined, okay? And the point is, can we trust what the authority has to say regarding this issue? Okay, now what I want to do is I want to offer you an argument from authority regarding Christianity, because we can use other ways to kind of narrow it down to maybe some kind of theism, but narrowing theism down to Christianity, that's another step. And there's a lot of ways you could do this, but I just want to go this way because it's something that most of you have heard about, and I think it's a solid way of arguing. It's a way that some of you know from Josh McDowell, others from C.S. Lewis, but it's actually an ancient argument. And it's aut deus ad homo malus. Okay, now that's Latin for either God or a bad man. Okay, so what I'm starting with is Jesus of Nazareth, and I'm asking a question about Jesus. Now, I realize that for some people, they question the legitimacy of the records of the life of Jesus. I'm going to tell you something. In academics, almost nobody does. Now, they take exceptions with some particulars, like the supernatural, okay, but they do not take exception with the broad-based historical account of his life. And the reason is because it satisfies almost every single requirement in the canons of historical analysis. The Gospels are good history. One way of arguing in favor of the resurrection, for example, and I talk about this in The Story of Reality, I have a whole chapter on that, it's called Four Facts. And it's the minimal facts approach. You take four things that virtually every historian of the period, secular or believer, whatever, acknowledged to be true. Jesus died on a Roman cross, placed in a grave. 3 days later, the grave was empty. His group of disciples had an experience that they thought was Jesus appearing to him, and then a skeptic and a persecutor of the church, James and Saul of Tarsus, were converted based on what they said was an appearance of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, nothing supernatural about any of those facts, okay? But those facts taken in conjunction, these are facts that virtually every historian of the period agree on. You can reason what is the best explanation for each of those. It's going to turn out to be what the apostles said: "He who is dead is now arisen." But how do we do the four facts? We start with this basic information that the historians acknowledge is reliable. And this is what you get with the Gospels. Okay, even Bart Ehrman doesn't reject everything in the Gospels, all right? He wrote a book about the Jesus of history, for goodness sake. And it's because that history can be relied on. Okay, so now we're just going to take that, some of the basic information about Jesus, and we're going to ask some questions. Clearly, Jesus made claims about himself, both claims to divinity in a number of different cases, and in fact, we know that it was what he said about himself, who he was, that got him executed because we have records of the trial, okay? Are you the Christ, the Son of God? You've said it yourself. They tore their robes. Blasphemy. Being the Christ, the Messiah, is not blasphemous, making that claim. Claiming to be the Son of God was. And this got him in trouble all during his three and a half years of ministry. So he was executed for who he claimed to be. He claimed to be the Messiah and God incarnate, and he said that in a bunch of different ways, okay? So, you know, this is probably not controversial with you. But the question then is, what do we make of the claim? What do we make of Jesus' claim? Now, people like Jesus. That's why this tactic that I call, what a friend we have in Jesus, you put it on Jesus, can be so effective. This is why people say, well, Jesus never said anything about homosexuality, which isn't really strictly true. But nevertheless, why are they quoting Jesus? They're not Christians because they want Jesus on their side. You know, Jesus is a good guy. He's a smart guy. He's got spiritual insight. He agrees with us. That's what they're trying to do, okay? So they're using the same kind of tactic. So I'm saying, okay, here's the smart guy that people really like. Think about what he said. He said he was God and the Savior of the world. Now, was he right or was he wrong? No, I don't think he wasn't right. He was wrong. Okay, if he was wrong, he either knew he was wrong or he didn't know. Those are the only two options. Notice how I'm dividing this up. Is he right or wrong? If he's wrong, it's either knew it or didn't. This is a logical approach. I'm using the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle. So it's either or, nothing in the middle. Can't be both, can't be neither. Okay? I see the 5-minute time. Thank you. Wait a minute. Oh, yeah, he's right. Okay. Can't be both, can't be neither. If he's wrong, that if he claimed to be God and he knew that he was wrong, well, then Jesus was lying. A person who makes claims like that and knows they're false is just simply not telling the truth. Now, here's the question. Given what we know about Jesus of Nazareth, does that make sense? Does it make sense that Jesus, he's the guy who look, when I was on with Deepak Chopra, he was actually a different soundstage in New York, and I was in LA, but in any event, he said, I keep the Sermon of the Mount in my pocket wherever I go. I should have asked him to please produce it for the camera, but I didn't do that. I didn't want to embarrass him. But anyway, even a guy like that believes that what Jesus said was profound. Okay, this is the guy who's the liar? Really? No, that doesn't make any sense with the facts. Okay, well, maybe he thought he was God, and he didn't know he was God. He was deluded himself. Now, okay, very quickly, what do you make of somebody who thinks they're God in the sense that Jesus meant it and wasn't? This guy's crazy. He's certifiable. I mean, people have a lot of crazy ideas nowadays, but most people, anybody who makes that kind of claim nowadays is just dismissed, okay? But you couldn't dismiss Jesus. They sent soldiers to arrest him. And they came back empty-handed. They say, where's Jesus? He said, nobody speaks as this man speaks, okay? Jesus was absolutely amazing. Crazy? Really? If he's crazy, what does that say about us? Right? Okay, so, well, it doesn't make sense that he was lying. He was wrong and knew it. It doesn't make sense that he was crazy, he was wrong, and didn't know it. What option is left to us? No other option than he wasn't wrong. He was right. Now, that's argument by authority, but look, this is authority you can depend on. A lot of people don't like this line of reasoning, and they push back on it. I don't think any of the pushbacks have succeeded. The ancient dictum still applies, aut deus aut homo malus, either God or a bad man. There is no middle road. Lewis expanded on this tremendously in Mere Christianity. Simply put, when we look at the way good thinking is meant to look, and we look at the ways that we naturally assess truth claims in the world, by reflecting on them to see if they're not contradictory in some sense, or by seeing how they match up with the actual world that we experience, whether through empirical methods or other means of seeing that we have access to, or whether by authority, people we trust who can tell us about these kinds of things that we don't know about. It turns out that Christianity really fares well in every single one, and the other religions do not fare the same way. It's one of the reasons why I'm a Christian. And I'll close with this thought. I'll just sum it up here very, very quickly, all of this stuff. When my 17-year-old was 8 years old, she was baptized when she was 6, but when she was 8 years old, she started asking the why questions. And she said, Papa, how do we know that God is true? In other words, how do we know that this is what is really so? She'd been believing me, but now she wants to know the details. And now I have to explain this to my 8-year-old, and so I talk to adult audiences, but I got to kind of boil it down and make it simple. And then something came to mind that really I feel now captures my entire approach to this whole project. And here's what I said. Honey, the reason that we believe that God is true is because he's the best explanation for the way things are. The reason that we believe God is true is that he's the best explanation of the way things are. And that captures all of the things that I'm talking about here. Any old God won't do. But the spiritual understanding that comports best with our common sense faculties, that comports best with the way the world actually is as we discover it, that comports best with reliable authority, is the God that's worth trusting and believing in. And that's why I'm a Christian, because Christianity is the best explanation for the way things are. Lord, thank you so much that you have not left us in the dark, that for the genuinely seeking heart, there is an abundance of evidence. Your fingerprints and your footprints are everywhere. All we have to do is open our eyes to see them. And help us, Father, to be agents of eye-opening for others who desperately need Christ. By your grace. Amen. Amen, amen. 1 hour and 2 seconds. That 2 seconds was your applause. So I was on time. You're welcome, sir.